assistant to J. Edgar Hoover, Arthur DeLoach. So Arthur DeLoach, he was in charge of the FBI as far as suppressing evidence and not confiscating the pictures that were taken in Dealey Plaza.
Okay, so Grace then was given the order by Spellman to go ahead and conduct this hit. Who would Grace have turned to then for operations?
He would turn to the head of the Knights of Malta, the head of the CIA, Alan Dulles, who was really the head, even though he was relieved by Kennedy for the Bay of Pigs, deliberate loss of the Bay of Pigs that Kennedy was not responsible for. See, Kennedy did not give the order to cancel the air cover. According to Fletcher Prouty in his work, JFK, it was McGeorge Bundy who did that. And McGeorge Bundy was Skull and Bones, CFR, and therefore he betrayed Kennedy. So Kennedy is very much embarrassed, so he relieves Dulles of his command. He relieves Charles Cabell of his command as assistant deputy director of the CIA. And so now Kennedy reappoints John McCone as the head of the CIA, but McCone's first loyalty is to the Archbishop. It's not to Kennedy, because McCone is a Knight of Malta. He was formerly the head of the Atomic Energy Commission. He's a very great man of power. And so McCone is going to be subordinate to his commander, J. Peter Grace, and then he also has the Knights of Malta in the CIA, like James Angleton. And James Angleton was awarded one of the highest awards that could ever be given by the Knights of Malta for his protection of the Black Prince of Italy, who was a Borghese.
Oh, really? I did not know they were still around.
Oh, yes. Remember, the nobility still rules. The nobility of the Dark Age now rules the nations, but they rule them through these facades called democracies or republics. They're not really true democratic republics, but they call them republics or democracies. They control all the political leaders through the parties they control, and because they control all the money. And so the knights, the princes of the blood of Europe and America, they rule. And so Angleton was a part of this. Borghese was a part of this. Bloomfield was a part of this as a Knight of Malta. And so was Clay Shaw, the head of the trademark in New Orleans. So
he was a Knight of Malta also.
Clay Shaw was CIA, a Knight of Malta, Roman Catholic, head of trademark in New Orleans. And he was a co-director of CMC in Italy and involved with Perminex also. And some of the princes that were involved, and the Knights of Malta involved with CMC are Prince Gutierrez de Spadafora, an Italian industrialist and a large landowner. His daughter-in-law was related to High Marshal. Jacques' son-in-law was Otto Scorzini. Otto Scorzini was a Knight of Malta.
He was he?
He was, yes, he was.
He was
the one who helped Bormann rebuild the Reich out of South America, and Bormann was protected by a Knight of Malta named Juan Perón.
Eric, how did they coordinate events in Dallas? Were there Jesuits on the ground in Dallas, or did they delegate responsibility and authority for the actual operations to CIA, mafia, special forces? Who handled the actual groundwork in Dallas?
Okay, the Jesuits always use third parties now. They don't personally carry out assassinations. And that's the purpose for the intelligence communities and the mafia that they've created. So they always keep an arm's length away from these crimes. They used to do it themselves, but since the revival and since really the turn of the 20th century, they have their third trusted, they call it, Ignatius Loyola called it in his secret instruction as a trusted third party. So they always use a trusted third party. So, for example, in Dallas, we know that the night before this was all worked out months in advance. Alan Dulles was one of the planners of it, of the CIA. Gerald Ford was, I'm sure, involved. He's also a Knight of Malta, high-level 33rd degree Freemason. John McCloy was involved. McCloy was a very key individual. McCloy was the one who released at least 28 high-level Nazi murderers out of prison after the Nuremberg trials by 1951. So John McCloy was very much involved. Hoover was involved. Hoover hated the Kennedys. In fact, Hoover was going to be relieved of his command by John F. Kennedy. Johnson was involved. Johnson was not going to be a running mate for Kennedy for 1964. Carlos Marcello and Joseph Savello were involved. They're the Mafia Don, Savello the Mafia Don of Dallas, and Marcello the Mafia Don of New Orleans. They were involved because Marcello had been deported to Guatemala for 24 hours. He was enraged over Robert Kennedy, and so he was very much incited for the killing of JFK. So all these men of power, Earl Cabell, whose brother, Charles Cabell, had been relieved of his command of assistant director to the CIA. He happens to be the mayor of Dallas.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so Earl Cabell since he's the mayor of Dallas, he's going to be in control of the police chief of Dallas, Jesse Curry. He's also going to be in control of the DA, Henry Wade. And also the Texas Rangers are involved. You have the Dallas, the sheriff of the county, the Dallas-Fort Worth County there, Sheriff Peoples, he's involved. And it's quite intriguing that all of these men that I just mentioned to you, including Murchison, Hunt, Richard Nixon, were all at the secret meeting at Clint Murchison's mansion in Dallas on November 21st in 1963, according to Madeline Duncan Brown, President Johnson's Roman Catholic mistress for 21 years, who bore him a son named Stephen. And she wrote a book called Texas in the Morning. And this is also validated by Robert D. Morrow in his book First-Hand Knowledge, How I Participated in the CIA Mafia Murder of President Kennedy. And this is validated on page, page 195 in a note, and he says, note 12, it was from his good friend Hoover that Richard Nixon learned of the pending assassination. Interestingly, on the eve of the assassination, Hoover and Nixon attended a meeting together at the Dallas home of oil baron Clint Murchison. Among the subjects discussed at this meeting were the political futures of Hoover and Nixon in the event President Kennedy was assassinated. Well, that's where they made their final plans. And according to Madeline Duncan Brown, when Johnson came out of the meeting, he said, that SOB will never embarrass me again. So they had it all planned the night before and knowing exactly what they were going to do. And there are, according to my list of the Who Are the Knights of Malta by Martin Lee, there are at least 8 Knights of Malta who are residents in Dallas. And, of course, George de Mohrenschildt was also a Knight of Malta. His brother Dmitri was a Knight of Malta. The de Mohrenschildts were Russian nobles openly driven from Russia by Lenin at the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, so that it would appear to be that the revolution was really anti-noble, anti-aristocracy, when in fact this was a ruse to make the Russian Revolution look like it was completely Masonic and completely Jewish. Now, so George de Mohrenschildt is a knight. Now,
as we discussed with Peter Levenda some months ago, there was a connection, sort of a tangential connection between de Mohrenschildt and the patsy, the guy who was accused of shooting, and why shouldn't I? Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald. It's amazing that I can discuss this and forget his name. But interestingly enough, that would get too far off track, but very, very bizarre that de Mohrenschildt had some contact with Oswald prior to the events of November 22nd of '63.
We know it's only odd unless we know who Oswald really is. See, Oswald, according to Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig, was an FBI informant.
Really?
Yes, and you can find this on one of Mark Lane's video he has, 2 Men in Dallas. So Oswald was an FBI informant. That's why he was conversing with Hosty. Oswald was FBI. Yeah, and remember, at this meeting at Murchison's house, there's another guy that's there, and his name is Jack Ruby.
Okay.
Jack Ruby's not only mob, he's also an FBI informant.
Ruby was at that meeting at Murchison's?
Yes. Oh. And he was also an FBI informant. So you have Mafia FBI tied in the person of Jack Ruby. Another thing about de Mohrenschildt, or about FBI, or Oswald de Mohrenschildt, of course, they both speak Russian. Mm-hmm. And Oswald is also a CIA operative,
right?
Because he was not a real defector.
Mm-hmm.
And he married a woman whose uncle was a KGB officer.
Right.
So After Oswald, they're setting Oswald up to be this patsy, so they have to paint him with the brush of a fanatic and make him look like he's a communist and a Russian and a Soviet. And so that was the purpose of him staying in Russia for, nearly 2 years. So he comes back. He's not even debriefed, so it shows you his CIA connection. And then his wife comes with him, which is virtually impossible. I mean, Victor Herman couldn't get his wife out. Victor Herman had been a slave in Russia for, 40-something years. It's a tremendous story that you might want to run sometime. It's called Coming Out of the Ice. Victor Herman wrote a book called Coming Out of the Ice and the Gray People, showing that Henry Ford sacrificed 73 American families to Joseph Stalin, all of them killed in the gulags, except Victor Herman, this Jew who managed to escape by the grace of God, and these Americans built the whole Gorky plant, and then after they built it, they were eliminated. But that's neither here nor there. Victor Herman couldn't get his wife out. How could Oswald get his wife out? Because he was CIA.
That was one of the points that was really highlighted in Oliver Stone's movie JFK.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that a little bit more. I want to get your assessment of the film. But that was one of the things that stuck with me regarding Oswald. How is it that he was able, first of all, to defect, quote unquote, but then to return with so little difficulty? In early 1960s America, at the height of the Cold War, you would think that he would have found himself in a prison so fast if he tried to come back.
Right. Look what happened to Yuri Nushenko. Nushenko came over here and he said the KGB at the time, where they were not handling Oswald. He was not a KGB agent sent back here. Nushenko was a legitimate defector. What did Angleton do? He tortured him for, nearly 3 years. That's what Oswald should have went through when he was in Russia. What happens? He's given the royal treatment. He works in a factory in Minsk. I mean, the guy is on Easy Street. He gets married and then he comes back. No. The CIA and the KGB work together. That's why the Cold War is a hoax. The Cold War is a creation of the press in this country, controlled by the Vatican through the Council on Foreign Relations. The Cold War never existed. There was never a real war between the Russian government and the American government. It's all a hoax. What happened was low-level men were killed, and there were wars trying to prop it up, like the Korean War and so on, that were in the Vietnam War, that shows it's come out of the Cold War. But it was all a hoax. On the top, they all worked together because the Jesuits were building their international intelligence community that is now completely and totally united. And this is one of the keys in understanding how Oswald got in and how he got out, because the KGB and the CIA worked together, both of them run by Knights of Malta, Knights particularly like Kim Philby, who was a KGB general at the time. He already went to Russia. He was already shown to be a spy, so he was MI5, and he left, and then instead of being executed, he was able to go to Moscow and be a KGB agent at the time of the Kennedy assassination. And the other thing is Anatoly Golitsyn. Anatoly Golitsyn comes from a royal Russian family all the way back to Alexander I. Golitsyn was a Knight of Malta, and he came over to the United States and was given all the secret files of the CIA by James Angleton. And he went through these files for a couple of years, and that's why all the CIA operatives in Russia were killed, because they were betrayed by Angleton. And Angleton was a Knight of Malta, and he betrayed him to his brother Knight of Malta, Golitsyn, who then forwarded all this information to Moscow.
So all the pieces are in place in Dallas. We've got all of these powerful Knights of Malta on the ground and in positions of authority where they can direct the pawns on the chessboard.
That's right. And one other thing I forgot. The Bishop of Dallas-Fort Worth is Thomas Kiley Gorman. Thomas Kiley Gorman is a Knight of Malta. Okay. So therefore, he's overseeing everything that's going on in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Now, I have read, and I'm certainly not a scholar on the JFK assassination, but I've read that the security measures that should have been standard for a presidential motorcade were totally lacking in Dallas that day. The route of the motorcade, the number of security forces on the ground, just totally absent. In other words, they did everything wrong that could have been done wrong. Who would have been responsible for those security measures? Would that have been the Secret Service? and who would have been in a position to remove the protection from around President Kennedy?
Well, as I understand, the one responsible for the security of the president would have been military intelligence, General Lansdale, according to Fletcher Prouty in his great work, JFK. So Lansdale, who was CFR and was involved with the Nazis, he is the one who is behind removing all the protection of JFK in Dallas for that day.
Okay.
And so with that, the Secret Service are the ones that will be carrying out the assassination, because